Marie Beardsley was one of the artists asked to make the move from the old studio.
With this big, new, multi-million-dollar studio in Burbank, everything was segregated, and things got too big and too impersonal. And I think that's where the trouble started.
Disney's assembly line methods had created a hierarchy of jobs. At the top were the animators, all men, and all hand-picked by Disney. Beneath them were hundreds of inkers and painters. Their job was to colour in the thousands of drawings that made up each scene. It was monotonous work, and Disney decided that it was a job for women.
This is the first studio that departmentalized women to do the slave work. It is a way of keeping a disciplined lower force to do all this menial work, and they were treated terribly.
No women in the animation department whatsoever. Not at all. That was the men's department. So the women were just in the inking and painting department. They just inked the drawings and painted them. I guess it never occurred to Walt to even put a man in the inking and painting. That was sort of demeaning work, you know.
I tell you, they were kept in a room and they dasn't get up. Then they had a tea break. Had tea, then back to work.
The supervisors would come around and stand behind you and watch how well you were inking and how fast you were painting. You were timed to see if you were worth keeping on. Some people got fired.
This I remember clearly, Walt saying once that women, you know, were all right, you know, to be used in a menial capacity, because once they reached the age of 30, the hand got shaky, so it was time to get rid of them.
Little skunk tails going through the flowers. That's still in. All right.
Disney liked to think of himself as the head of a large and happy family, and in The Reluctant Dragon, he plays the part of a relaxed and approachable boss.
Have I? We're just going to run a new picture. You want to sit through it?
Yeah, I'd love to. It'd be fine.
You can roll whenever it's ready.
But in reality, the atmosphere at the new studio had changed, and Disney's increasingly autocratic style of management meant that for many, the words Uncle Walt had begun to take on a new meaning.
I'd be walking down the hallway, and I'd see people ahead of me sort of get out of the center of the hall and move out of his way, and as he came by, it was a feeling that they flattened against the wall almost to avoid being in his way.
People around the studio called him Uncle Walt, but there was a satirical spin on that, because, you know, there are uncles who are a real pain. You know, they're into your life all the time, and domineering and controlling, and that was Uncle Walt to most people at the studio.
In Disney's extended family, the studio, he had this ironclad ban on any kind of socializing and anything that smacked of sexuality. That was completely verboten.
An inter-office memo was sent around to all the girls in ink and paint, and it said, "The men who are married at Disney's are happily married, and we want all of the girls to understand that."
He was quite a Puritan. He didn't want any hanky-panky.
For a Hollywood mogul, Disney was unusually straight-laced. He had met his wife Lillian in 1924, when she arrived from Idaho to work at his fledgling studio. They stayed together for more than 40 years. No one who worked with Disney remembers him showing any interest in other women. In fact, he told one of his animators that he loved Mickey Mouse more than any girl he'd ever known.
It was Disney's birthday. A couple of animators made a film of Mickey and Minnie fornicating and ran it, and everybody got a really good laugh out of it, and it was a very harmless bit of footage, at the end of which Disney stood up and said, "That was great. That was fabulous animation. Who did that?" And the animators who did raised their hands, and he fired them on the spot.
And nobody crossed him. If they did cross him, they were simply fired.
Joan Scott was hired by Disney as a screenwriter. She was assigned to a veteran studio producer who'd been with Disney for more than 23 years. But on a trip to Europe, The producer made the mistake of disagreeing with Disney over a filming location.
They were in the hotel lobby discussing these two places, and Jerry was speaking up for the choice he'd made. And Disney said, but so-and-so said, this is better because. And Jerry said, but no, Walt, I think. And Walt said, take the next plane home. Fired him in the hotel lobby.
Hello, I'm Walt Disney. When I was a boy in Missouri, I practically lived outdoors. I find I don't make it quite as often now, but like millions of others, I like to enjoy it when I can.
Disney was raised in America's heartland, and throughout his life, he felt strong attachment to the folksy values of his Midwestern childhood. He liked to say that his hometown had made him what he was. But America's Midwest was never the most cosmopolitan place, and along with his apple pie values came a certain small-town prejudice.
He was as bigoted a person as I've ever encountered, especially in a position of power. He made no bones about not liking this or that type of people. He especially hated, oh God, he didn't like Jews, especially New York ones.
Joan Scott had been aware of Disney's anti-Semitic reputation when she arrived at the studio. Being part Jewish, it made her feel uncomfortable.
We were on our way to lunch at the commissary, and Disney's right-hand man came rushing out the door and said, wait a minute. And he said, Joan, I have a question from Walt. And he just wants to know what your background is. And I knew, I don't know if it's instinctively just common sense, that he didn't want to know if I was English or French. So I said, I'm really American hash. I'm some English, some Czech, some German, and I'm an eighth Jewish. And you could see this man's face just change expression.
Somebody hired, of course, the front office or, you know, whoever was hiring, I forget, hired this very dark, I mean, he was blue-black Hindu, very dark. And so Walt was, you know, walking along the hallway up to his room and must have made a take like he can't believe it. When he saw this guy, God, he did a take. And went up to his office, I guess, and he said, what's that, you know, what's that Negro doing around here? Oh, no, well, he's not a Negro, he's a Hindu. So he said, well, he's pretty dark. Get rid of him.